It's tough to keep a video game franchise creative, and the usual response to things getting stale is a total reinvention. And this element of change is something to be celebrated in the video game space. That said, sometimes a recalibration of a beloved series is done for all the wrong reasons, where their unique identity is swapped out for something far more generic, far safer, and far more boring than what made them beloved to begin with. Now, to clarify, I'm not saying all of the following games are outright bad by any means, just that they're not as unique as they used to be. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 video game franchises that ruined their identity. Number 8, Call of Duty. What even is Call of Duty in 2023? While it used to run annually with 3 developers each getting 3 years to make new entries into their own sub-franchises, now it's an all-hands-on-deck affair with every developer across Activision contributing to one release each year just to get it over the line. Not only has that led to a strange release schedule where Modern Warfare 2 is immediately followed a year later by Modern Warfare 3, but that many warring creative voices has naturally led to the series feeling disparate and lacking cohesion. Take the beloved Zombies mode, for instance. Once a Treyarch specialty, the mode has since become a standard COD staple, with new versions of it being included in a bunch of different sub-franchises, whether it makes sense or not. Gone is the overarching story and natural mechanical progression of its original inclusion in Treyarch games, and in its place is, well, just a Zombies mode, thrown in any new release that's lacking in content. And then there's Warzone. What started off as a PUBG killer has slowly morphed into Fortnite. While COD games have admittedly always had wacky crossovers and out there skins for years, the volume of this pop culture crossover in what's otherwise a grounded battle royale experience has gotten outrageous. I mean, fans are just getting over the inclusion of the boys skins and superpowers in the game when they're about to be hit with the next battle pass, which boasts skins for Snoop Dogg and Nicki Minaj. Where these used to be fun one-off events, now they're just kind of the norm. Number 7, Assassin's Creed. The original Assassin's Creed games felt like a breath of fresh air for the gaming industry, tightly focused on social stealth, parkour, and an interesting Assassins v Templar story with a sci-fi twist. However, after years of annualized releases that became increasingly buggy and stale, fresh ideas were needed. Rather than figure out how to take the core components of the series and provide a new spin on them though, Ubisoft looked to other games for inspiration. From Assassin's Creed Origins onwards, the franchise turned into a bloated action RPG that included every sandbox trope under the sun. Incorporating elements from The Witcher 3 in particular, modern Assassin's Creed is trying to be the every game, with a loot system that wouldn't feel out of place in Destiny, combat based around abilities and cooldowns, and a massive open world that isn't built around parkour. And again, that's not to say these elements haven't been enjoyable, but when there's barely a focus on the assassins and their stories in a game called Assassin's Creed, then why give it this title at all? Let it be something else. Though the upcoming Assassin's Creed Mirage is largely dropping this new approach and going back to basics, this will be short-lived as Ubisoft have already announced plans for a live service future for the franchise. Number 6, Battlefield. As will be the case with so many franchises on this list, the Battlefield series would be fine if the developers were just allowed to make a Battlefield game. Unfortunately, EA isn't content with just selling 15 million copies of each new game to its dedicated player base, but clearly envisions Battlefield as a larger moneymaker, something that appeals to both fans of the franchise, but also fans of other shooters. As a result, the last few games have made concessions to more casual audiences, removing or diluting classic mechanics and features, especially those centered around team play. We've seen the likes of Battlefield 2042 introduce hero shooter-style operators in place of the regular class system, half-baked attempts at battle royale and extraction game modes, flatter, less detailed maps, and far less environmental destruction. Fans, though, don't come to this series for an Overwatch clone or a Call of Duty clone, but to, well, play Battlefield. EA doesn't seem to understand that, though. In order for it to bring in billions, the company wants Battlefield to appeal to every shooter fan, not understanding that, as the cliche goes, that'll only result in it appealing to nobody. Number 5, Watch Dogs. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of Watch Dogs, and a decade on, the franchise's squandered potential still stinks. The first game famously had its issues. The overly serious revenge story starring Aiden Pierce, an incredibly generic video game protagonist, was a major dud, but the gritty Chicago open world it established did have a lot to love. The hacking mechanics remained somewhat grounded, facilitating interesting storylines and gameplay possibilities that shook up the otherwise familiar open world structure. In an attempt to sort out the tonal issues with that story, the second game focused on a new cast of characters in a more vibrant and personality-filled San Francisco setting. While the characters were strong and likable here though, they brought their own tonal problems. The freedom players had to gun down anyone they wanted during gameplay clashed with the depiction of the protagonists as anything but murderous psychopaths. Perhaps attempting to avoid this mistake again, Watch Dogs Legion moved the action to cyberpunk London and had no main character at all, instead allowing players to jump into the shoes of any randomly generated NPC. Unsurprisingly, this felt like the most incoherent game of the lot as a result, with no creative through line and stereotypical hacker visuals. With 3 games then, Watch Dogs tried to hit 3 different identities. The first being a moody superhero origin story, the second being a funnier, character-driven crime caper, and the third being classic cyberpunk. And if it had chosen just one and ran with it, it may be in a way better place than it is right now. Number 4, Halo. Halo's unique brand of arena combat, stunning sci-fi art direction, and of course, epic overarching story made it the kind of series that people buy a console to play. Since original developers Bungie left the franchise following prequel Halo Reach though, things have not gone too well. New devs 343 Industries debuted Halo 4 as a franchise reinvention, and initially, things seemed fine. While it was clear the game was missing some of the Bungie magic, it was still an impressive continuation of a story thought to be complete. With Halo 5 though, the wheels well and truly started to come off. Haunted by a misleading marketing campaign that sold a completely different story to what was actually in the game, the series' identity crisis began in earnest, incorporating live service elements into the multiplayer, chopping fan-favorite features, and altering mechanics to fit better with other successful shooters of the time. Sequel Halo Infinite, after a last-minute delay anyway, looked like it was trying to return to the spirit of the original Halo. Evoking that title's art style and initially trying to do right by fans, Infinite had a solid start, but felt surprisingly empty over time. Once again, the community-driven elements that made the series so beloved to begin with, that being, couch co-op, forge mode, etc., were all absent here, proving that the developers lacked the understanding of what allowed Halo to stand out to begin with. Number 3, Batman Arkham. The Arkham trilogy and Origins remains a hugely recommendable series of games. But even in Arkham Knight, an installment I personally think is underrated, you can see the developers moving away from Asylum's defining identity. While that first game had its fair share of gadgets and gizmos, it presented itself mostly as a classic gothic Batman tale in its visual presentation. By the time Knight came around though, the original aesthetic had given way to something more mainstream, a little bit less weird, and more indebted to sci-fi tropes. That's evident not only in Gotham as a whole, but in Batman's suit, which functioned in this game more like Iron Man's than the Dark Knight's. But of course, the shift in direction was summed up by the incredible focus on the Batmobile, which meant a huge chunk of the gameplay was spent shooting down drones and other tech-focused enemies. A far cry from the mutated monsters and gothic villains of Arkham's first title. But it's with the upcoming Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League that the Arkhamverse has truly lost its originality. Not only is the visual design more generic, but the gameplay has shifted to a multiplayer looter shooter closer to the Avengers than what made the developers famous. And while that might still make for a great game in the long run, it's a shame it's come at the expense of what got people so interested in this series to begin with. Number 2, Wolfenstein. It's pretty easy to pinpoint where it all went wrong for the Wolfenstein reboot. The first attempt at modernizing the veteran series was Wolfenstein The New Order, a surprising hit that eschewed first-person shooting conventions of the time by delivering a decidedly more old-school experience. That ironic freshness, combined with its fascinating alternate history setting of a 1960s where the Nazis won the war, made for a perfect reinvention. And despite some tonal wobbles, Wolfenstein 2 mostly carried that on perfectly, delivering offering more robust shooting while going all in on the first title's wackier elements. At this point, the series seemed to be in a good place, and then came Wolfenstein Youngblood. Technically a spin-off, Youngblood was such a misguided project that it managed to sour fans on the franchise as a whole. Though it had an intriguing premise taking place 20 years after the events of the previous game and putting players in the shoes of hero BJ Blazkowicz's two daughters, changes to the core gameplay saw it flop. Unlike the narrative-driven single-player games that preceded it, Youngblood was a grindy co-op time sink, with bullet sponge enemies, uninspired missions, and bare-bones story. As many critics at the time pointed out, it felt like it was trying to have Destiny 2's lunch as a quote-unquote looter shooter without loot, an approach which was a far cry from what people enjoyed about the first two games. Number 1. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon. Ghost Recon made a name for itself as a tactical, near-future military shooter. Blending first-person and third-person combat, the focus was on getting through environments, often as a squad, giving orders and using state-of-the-art weaponry to take out your targets. Especially when it first launched, its focus on not quite sci-fi, not quite modern-day settings and stories made it stand out from other shooters. And even though it would push further into future technology with each game, this cohesion of presentation and game design remained at the heart of the experience. And then it became just another Ubisoft open world game. With the release of the pretty good Ghost Recon Wildlands, the franchise traded in regular levels for a huge sandbox. Taking inspiration from GTA and other open world titles, Wildlands still put you in charge of a squad, but suddenly you were able to commandeer vehicles, hunt down side missions, and clear out enemy bandit camps. And while that was still enjoyable to a degree, it was a formula barely different to that found in Far Cry, Watch Dogs, and a whole bunch of other open world games. Ubisoft tried to push this further in failed sequel Breakpoint before then trying to reinvent Ghost Recon as a battle royale style multiplayer shooter, which was an announcement that was so hated the project was actually cancelled before it released. So yeah, maybe like Battlefield, the answer to the publisher's issues here might just be to let them make a Ghost Recon game. I mean, yeah, call me crazy. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about the current identities of these franchises? And are there any other ones you thought got a little bit more generic over time? Let me know, and while you're down there, if you could please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.